Okay, just some recent word images from people who've been to Somalia. After 3 years of drought, thousands of colourful tents have sprung up in Mogadishu amidst the destroyed buildings. Thousands of starving Somalis left the countryside for the city. They appear in the streets in tattered clothes with bundles on their heads, carrying jerry cans in their hands and babies on their backs. These are the younger, stronger people. The older ones and the sick are left in the villages in the countryside. Even in the drought, what water there was in parts of the country was diverted to banana plantations. Bananas are a cash crop, sold mainly to the Middle East. The refugee camps meant for maybe 90,000 people, huge, but with 300,000 people, where the guards rape the women and steal the food aid. Warlords, for that's what they are, gangsters is another word, allow refugees to settle on land that they control, and in return they get a share of the aid that's brought to the camps. Their guards rape the women and steal the food. Babies and young children dying of diarrheic diseases, all for want of a water purification unit, which would cost very little. But some good news. I read in the paper this morning, headline, Somalia, famine ends after a good harvest. The rains came. Killed tens of thousands since July. But food stocks could run out again in May. Same story, that's the Independent. More or less the same story. Rain ends Somali famine, but crisis will continue, UN warns. Well, at least the rains came, and they got a harvest. Well, if those were word images from Somalia, what about the BBC? I looked at it, the BBC website to see what its coverage was of Somalia in the past couple of weeks. This is from the 17th of January. Somalia, oil exploration. Drilling begins in Puntland. Oil exploration, that's in the northeast, of Somalia. Oil exploration has begun in this country which has been racked by civil war for 2 decades. The semi-autonomous Puntland region where the drilling is taking place says it is an opportunity for peace. There's an assumption that there will be 3 to 4 billion barrels of oil, he said. Nigeria has about 37 billion barrels of oil, and Libya has Africa's most with about 46 billion. However, according to Africa Oil, whose firm Horn Petroleum Corporation is operating the project, the drilling of wells will take about 3 months. And now, of course, totally unrelated, with nothing to do with the same issue, I'm sure. 2nd of February, William Hague, British Foreign Secretary, visits Somalia's Mogadishu. And I'm sure he's not got any interest in oil at all. William Hague, no gas. William Hague has called for renewed pressure against Islamist militants during the first visit to Somalia by a foreign secretary for 20 years. The British government is holding a conference in London on the 23rd of February to try and find a political solution and tackle piracy and extremism. The first UK envoy for 2 decades has also been appointed. That is a British ambassador who's currently in Kenya, but will arrive, we're told. Security was tight for the visit of the Foreign Secretary, who travelled in a fleet of armoured vehicles to meet Somalia's President Sheikh Sharif Ahmad. Mr. Hague described Somalia as, in quotes, the world's most failed state. He praised African Union troops for forcing al-Shabaab militants out of the city, that's Mogadishu, but he warned that much of the south remained in the hands of militants, saying, "We need to step this up." Neighbouring Ethiopia and Kenya also have forces in Somalia and have made advances on al-Shabaab in the south and the west. Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan visited in August, and UN Chief Ban Ki-moon in December, the first visit by a UN Secretary General in 18 years. Correspondents say Britain now appears to be driving a new international push to tackle the root causes of Somalia's insecurity and conflict. Representatives of more than 40 nations have been invited to the London Conference on Somalia later this month. In 2010, MI5 Director General Jonathan Evans warned it was only a matter of time before militants trained in Somali camps inspired acts of violence on the streets of the UK. I think that says it all. The preparations, are underway. Okay, the World Bank and United Nations rank Somalia second only to Sudan in northeast Africa as a prospect for oil. The geological similarities with neighbouring, for that's what they are, Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states are quite obvious, and the 3 to 4 billion barrels is an underestimate. The UN calculates somewhere in the region of 9 billion barrels of oil reserves. Somalia also possesses undeveloped, unused, but they know they're there, reserves of uranium for atomic bombs or atomic energy, gas, copper, bauxite, iron ore, tin. Historically, it was known for its frankincense and myrrh. Okay. If we put this conference that's coming up in context, it really doesn't look that innocent, although they'll claim it's for the, fighting terrorism and, the benefit of Somalia's suffering people. It really looks menacing and threatening indeed. We counted the NATO attack on Libya in March the 19th, it commenced last year, to be the British Armed Forces' 46th separate military intervention in the Middle East and North Africa since the end of the Second World War. Can you just pass these round? This is the list I compiled of those interventions. Just take one. Britain and the United States, have been permanently at war since 1991, a year that people from Somalia will know the significance of in a different context. That was the year of the collapse of the Soviet Union, as the United States seeks to achieve and maintain global hegemony, domination, with Britain as its partner. 1991 was the year that Siad Barre fell. Have I pronounced his name right? Yes, Barre? Siad Barre fell. It wasn't a coincidence, it wasn't an accident that it was 1991, the year that the Soviet Union fell, or collapsed, and the sort of power plays, that sustain that kind of dictator, were no longer necessary for the imperialists. If you look at 2011, you will see the United States with Britain engaged in wars from, and try and think of it, if we had a map, I should have brought one, try and think of it geographically, 2011, wars in Libya, Somalia, where the drones are flown, Yemen, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, an arc of wars. yeah, that is taking place. From North Africa to the Middle East to Central Asia. In each one of these countries, the United States is using unmanned aerial vehicles, or if you like, drone warfare. To these conflicts, we could now add the covert war that is being waged against Iran, which threatens to break out into open war, and against Syria, where outside forces, you know, including Britain and France and the US, are intervening. The US now has military deployments, sometimes only token deployments, in 29 African states. Military, US military in 29 African states. US Foreign Policy magazine and the Fund for Peace, which is based in Washington, rank Somalia the #1 failed state in the world. The United States currently flies drones armed with missiles over Somalia from neighbouring Djibouti, neighbouring Ethiopia, the United Arab Emirates, and out in the Indian Ocean, the Seychelles. Those are the bases that they use. President George W. Bush might have had Somalia in mind when he said, and this is a quote worth remembering, "There is no telling how many wars it will take to secure freedom in the homeland." It's an intention, isn't it, eh? A war. What we are seeing today in Africa, the Middle East and Central Asia, resembles a replay of the colonial scramble for territories and resources that was played out by the major imperial powers a century or more ago. Yeah, we're going back to the early 1900s. Only now it is conducted with very much more lethal weaponry than they had in 1911 or 1912. The global crisis of capitalism is producing a battle for zones of influence and a repartitioning of the world, rolling back, yeah, the advances that were achieved in Africa, such as they were, yeah, in the 50s and 60s with independence. There are key resources, oil and gas are critical among them, that are required for the owner to possess, to exert regional and global power, and this is by the imperialist states. To control the resource and its distribution is often the aim of these wars. And because of this, key areas grow in strategic significance in the globe. These include, and especially so as we shall see in the coming period, the Strait of Hormuz between the Arabian Peninsula and Iran, the Caspian Basin with maybe 90 billion barrels of oil and much more gas, the East and South China Seas, which are not just where oil is, but you know, are the major routes to and from China, and also the Gulf of Aden between Somalia, Djibouti and the Arabian Peninsula, which is, you know, the route from the Mediterranean down the Suez Canal, the Red Sea and into the Indian Oceans. It's a major trading route, both from the east, yeah, and from Europe to the Indian Ocean, India and China. Okay, well, this might be for some of you what we call in Britain teaching your grandmother to suck eggs. But it's partly also for my comrades' sake. I've done a little history, little research, and I said that we are witnessing a replay of the colonial scramble in Africa of a century or more ago. And you can certainly witness that with Libya, yeah, with the British and French, the former, you know, occupiers, you know, in Italy with its ENI gas, yeah, at work. You can see it in Libya. A replay of a century as it goes, you know, battles, yeah, for control. Well, we could go further back. The Portuguese it was that destroyed towns and ports along what was to become the Somali coastline from 1541 onwards. However, it was to be the completion of the Suez Canal in 1869 that changed that territory that is now Somalia's fortunes and brought forth the colonial appetites for this part of the world. France bought Obok, it's a small town, for 50,000 francs. Bought it, yeah, buying a town, for 50,000 francs in 1862. They then took neighbouring Djibouti, yeah, which is now, you know, a sort of semi-statelet, in 1888. At the 1884 Berlin Conference, Britain established a protectorate in Somaliland. The 1884 Berlin Conference was the sort of pinnacle, yeah, like of the scramble for Africa. Just, you know, the European powers claiming this state, that land, yeah, carving up Africa between them. The British intention was to prevent foreign encroachment on the route from the Mediterranean to India, the jewel in the crown of our empire, the British Empire anyway, and to use the region to feed the British garrison in Aden, across the Gulf of Aden. In 1906, to compensate Italy for its defeat in Ethiopia, it obtained Somalia's southern coast. This was leased to an Italian company called Benadir for 160,000 rupees a year by the British Protectorate of Zanzibar. No qualms about, you know, just buying and selling other people's lands. From 1892, it was transferred. This territory was transferred to the it was transferred to the Italian government in 1906. Bartering, buying, and selling other people's lands. That's how the Europeans conducted affairs in Africa. Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdullah Hassan, who the British called the Mad Mullah, was a brilliant military strategist and a great Somali poet. He led the dervish resistance to colonial occupation and on 4 occasions defeated the British between 1900 and 1904. The resistance resumed from 1908 to 1920. In 1912, the British Colonial Office established what it called a camel constabulary to try and occupy the interior, you know, where the dervish forces had power. It was a military body armed with machine guns and rifles, overseen and staffed by British officers. It operated without recourse to courts, that is, it operated by arbitrary justice. And if you read the diaries of the British constables, well, they were officers, yeah, sergeants, etc., they viewed hunting the dervishes, yeah, the Somali people, rather like sport hunting, yeah, in the English countryside. Early in the morning of the 21st of January 1920, British Royal Naval ships and 12 RAF warplanes attacked dervish positions. They shelled and bombed them. The resistance was defeated and Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdullah Hassan was killed. But of particular note in the period, you should note this: the 1915 Treaty of London. In order to get Italy on their side in the First World War against Germany, Britain and France promised Italy compensation if they should appropriate German colonies in Africa. So if Britain and France get, you know, German colonies, you know, like Tanzania, Namibia, you know, and elsewhere, Cameroon, yeah, and elsewhere, then, you know, in compensation for joining in with the, you know, the British and the French, yeah, we would give Italy, yeah, compensation. Yeah, actually, what it was, was part of Somalia. That compensation took the form of Libya, and Somalia, or a part of it which was given to Italy in 1924. During the Second World War, in August 1940, Italian troops with Somali units in tow invaded British Somaliland. This was recaptured the following year by the British, but using, in particular, African, South African and East African troops fighting alongside the British, So mobilisation of their Kenyan forces in particular to recapture it. At that stage, Kenyan colonial troops. On the 1st of July 1960, British and Italian-controlled regions were made independent and merged to form the Republic of Somalia. In 1969, General Siad Barre led a coup and proclaimed a socialist government. The Soviet fleet was given access to Somali ports in 1974. British intelligence services demanded that the media portray Somalia and Barre as, in quotes, Soviet puppets. In 1977, all Soviet advisors present in Somalia were expelled during the war with Ethiopia. In 1976, the so-called Front for the Liberation of Western Somalia, which was really part of Ethiopia then, launched a military offensive in the Ogaden, and the Ogaden straddles Ethiopia and Somalia. This was supported by Somalian government forces. The invasion was repelled by Ethiopia with the help of Cuban, Yemen and Libyan troops or forces. They were supported by most of the African Union countries, like diplomatically and politically. Somalia broke off relations with the Soviet Union, and from 1980 onwards, the US supplied the Barre regime with weapons, military training and economic aid in exchange for the US fleet having unrestricted access to Somalia's strategic Indian Ocean and Gulf of Aden next to the Red Sea ports for US vessels. Before his overthrow in 1991, and note this, Barre signed over nearly 2/3 of Somalia's territory to 4 US oil companies. They are Conoco, Amoco, Chevron and Phillips, which are now often merged. And no doubt they want to get back 2/3 of Somalia's territory, which was contracted to them. The United Somali Congress ousted Barre in 1991. It broke into clan-based factions who fought each other. Since then, there has been no functioning central government in Somalia. The country is divided, much of it between warlords with heavily armed gangs. And within 5 years of 1991, by 1996, 300,000 Somali children had died. 1.5 million out of a population of about 10 million had left the country, fled. In 1992-93, the United States gained United Nations Security Council approval to invade Somalia. The United Nations sent 28,000 troops into Somalia. The US would not accept what it saw as Islamic militants governing Somalia. In 1993, the US launched Operation Restore Hope to capture a warlord, or clan leader if you like, Farah Aidid. It resulted in the killing and dismemberment of 19 US soldiers, some say 18. It's presented in the movie Black Hawk Down, for which, in response, the US killed about 1,000 Somali people in revenge. In March 1994, the UN withdrew 10,000 European troops, leaving mostly African, Indian and Pakistani soldiers They were often attacked and they soon left. After the US and UN departure, foreign vessels entered Somali waters, engaged in illegal fishing, and the result was what you would expect, escalating piracy. The Republic of Somaliland, formerly the British Somaliland, declared independence in 1992. It contained 30% of Somalia's territory, but it is not internationally recognised. The US and British-backed Somali Transitional Federal Government was formed in 2004 in Kenya, mainly from warlords organised by the United States CIA, and then as the Alliance for the Restoration of Peace and Counter-Terrorism, is its name. In 2000, 11 Islamic Sharia courts formed the Union of Islamic Courts, and by 2006 they controlled much of Mogadishu and southern Somalia, forcing the transitional federal government into retreat. Al-Shabaab, or the Youth, is a radical wing of the Union of Islamic Courts, backed by Eritrea, which is an enemy or opponent of Ethiopia historically. In recent years, Somalia has been subject to occupation by Ethiopian, Kenyan, Ugandan, Burundian, and other African troops, operating under different United Nations or African Union mandates. What has been the result? According to the United Nations, it estimates a further 600,000 people became refugees in 2007, a further 800,000 in 2008. The Ethiopian army killed thousands of people and left tens of thousands maimed and injured, and the Al-Shabaab stronger in response to the Ethiopian occupation. Agriculture, I'm finishing now. Agriculture employs 65% of the workforce, and livestock accounts for 40% of the national income. It's really incredible figures. And livestock accounts for 50% of the export earnings. But note this, Somalia's exports total about $270 million a year, while remittances from abroad exceed $1.6 billion. In other words, Somalia is dependent on Somalis here, and elsewhere, giving money to their family back in Somalia. The difference, total exports, $270 million. Remittances over 1.6 billion. This is an absolute indictment of the colonial history that I've described, of imperialist meddling. In fact, meddling is the wrong word. Mutilation by imperialism of Somalia. It lives, if it lives at all, Somalia, on your generosity and your handouts. The mortality rate for children under 5 in Somalia is 200 per 1,000 babies and children. There is one nurse or midwife and 0.5, that's half a doctor, for every 10,000 people in Somalia. 1 in 4 children are acutely, that means dangerously, malnourished. With this 23rd of February conference approaching, we need to note not just what has been done to Somalia and by whom for over a century, but how imperialism tries to smother dissent here in Britain and the other homelands. At the end of 2010, the United States FBI lured and entrapped a US Somali citizen, Mohammed Osman Mohammed, accusing him of planning to bomb a Christmas celebration in Portland, Oregon. Maybe the young man was foolish, ill-informed, or very easily led. But we should be on our guard to these methods and tactics by imperialism here in Britain. But we must be aware that the imperialist attack abroad is matched by racist and oppressive moves at home. 2012 has begun. I told you about the wars, yeah? In 2011. 2012 has begun and danger is at hand. Thank you.